Hello and welcome to Chapter 3, The Settling of the Northern Colonies. We're covering 1618 to 1700s. Today our focus is the Protestant Revolution, or Reformation, excuse me, a little bit of European history, and then all the way to the Andros and the First American Revolution. So in the last chapter we talked about how the South was settled primarily for monetary reasons, for agriculture, for land, to get rich. We have a lot of cash crops, tobacco, rice, indigo. You have indentured servants who have slaves. And we're kind of what we're doing in these two chapters. We're setting the seeds for the formation of the United States of America, but also we're kind of setting the stage down the road for the Civil War. We're getting two vastly different societies, two different cultures, bound together by a political system, but in terms of making money, completely different. Whereas the South was based on agriculture, the North was really based on religious devotion. This is really why New England was founded, was for religious freedom. And it all started with Martin Luther, who ignited a revolution in religion in 1517 by nailing the 95 Theses on the Church of Wittenberg in Germany on November 1st, 1517. And because of the printing press, it ignited a revolution. Luther, who never wanted to actually break from the Catholic Church, was excommunicated, formed his own religion, and from that really sparked a movement in Europe where people were defying the church and forming their own version of religion, and which really had a big effect on what would become the United States of America. One of the people we're primarily concerned with is John Calvin of Switzerland, who had a religious commune and some different ideas. And Calvin, his ideas of Calvinism helped spawn Puritans, Scottish Presbyterians, French Huguenots, and the Dutch Reformed Church. The Puritans in particular is who we're really wanting to look at for the formation of New England. In his book, The Institutes of Christian Religion, Calvin said that God, with a capital G, the all-powerful, all-knowing, and all-good God, since God knew everything, God knew the moment you were born if you were predestined to go to heaven or to go to hell. John Calvin took a view that humans were weak, they were wicked, they're evil. And so this is the idea of predestination, that good works can't save your soul, which is directly against the Catholic Church. The Catholic Church has the 7 sacraments. You perform those to get admission into heaven. Their baptism, communion, confession, confirmation, holy matrimony, giving alms, and last rites are the 7 sacraments. Lutheranism only has 2. They have communion and I think matrimony. Maybe wrong. I can't remember. It's been a while. But Calvin doesn't have that. And so we're going to go into this idea of predestination. So with predestination, we humans are not certain of our future. We don't know, but God knows. Those that are predestined for heaven exude good qualities. So you do good things because you're going to heaven, not you're doing good things to get into heaven. It's kind of a reversal of things, a viewpoint for that. People sought for signs of conversion that they receive God's free gift to heaven. And really, if you get into some of the Puritan sermons, especially like Jonathan Edwards, God just despises us. He loathes us because we're so wicked and evil. And I remember Jonathan Edwards saying that God is holding us over this pit of hell by the tiniest of strings and just can't stand us because we're such sinners. And it's really only the grace of Jesus that saves us. And that gift from Jesus it's not earned, it's just given because of Jesus' love for us and dying for people's sins. And so you don't, like I said, you don't do things to get that grace. You're given that grace. And because you are predestined to go to heaven, you have these good qualities. But people are unsure because we don't know. We're not all knowing. We're not all powerful. We don't know the end of the story. And so people always look for signs that God had chosen them. It was thought to be an intense, identifiable experience for Puritans. And so then in England, you have the whole mess with Henry VIII, who changed England's church by name, not by rituals. He wanted the divorce from Catherine of Aragon. She couldn't produce a male heir, so he married Anne Boleyn, who he loved so much that, when she produced a female heir, he had her head chopped off. But he loved her, so he brought in a special swordsman from England or France to chop her head off instead of a guy whacking at it with a couple axes. Sorry, a little pause right there. There's something you can remember is how's it go? Divorced, beheaded, died, divorced, beheaded, survived. That's how you remember the six wives of Henry VIII. And so it was all basically to break away from the Church of England, excuse me, from the Catholic Church to form the Church of England. Mainly, it was a lot of political. He didn't want to answer to the Pope, and the Catholic Church owned a lot of property, which the Church of England, the government of England, seized. And so that's why the English break away from the Catholic Church, not because of theology or who should read the Bible. Just the king wanted a divorce. He also wanted more power in his own country, which led to the rise of the Puritans, also the rise of the Pilgrims. And we'll talk about the difference of those two here in a moment. Very popular, the Puritan movement in the depressed woolen districts, especially because of the enclosure movement. And basically, they wanted to decatholicize, I don't know if I can say that word, the Church of England, because the Church of England, like I said, changed by name, not by rituals. It's kind of a Catholic-like religion, kind of like Lutheranism. So the most devout Puritans were thought to only visible saints should be admitted to the church, that you shouldn't allow sinners, which goes against kind of the gospel. Jesus used to hang out with a lot of kind of a motley crew of people and trying to bring them to God. But Puritans didn't believe in that. The Church of England, though, took all of the king's subjects, all the good ones and the bad ones. And so you have a group of Puritans called separatists who wanted to break entirely from the Church of England. These are who we know as the Pilgrims, which we often mistake with the Puritans. King James I recognized the threat of the Pilgrims and the separatists and didn't like this, this crack in the foundation of the power of England. And so he kind of did what he could to get rid of the Pilgrims. He tried to threaten separatists out of the land. They were persecuted partially, and so many of them actually fled to Holland, which I've never understood. I mean, Holland, the country's the Netherlands, but it's known as Holland, and if you're from there, you're Dutch. I love gold, whatever. So they went there in 1608 from England to live in Holland. I'm from Holland, isn't that weird? They struggled in poverty, and they didn't like that their kids were being Dutchified, the Dutchification of their kids. They were speaking Dutch and wearing wooden clogs and picking tulips and running through windmills and anything else that's cliche Dutch that you can think of. I don't know. They just didn't like their kids speaking Dutch. So they wanted to go somewhere where their kids could be left alone for their beliefs and preserve their English culture. And so they want to be free to worship. They want a place to be English. And they contacted the Virginian Company for settlement and said, hey, can we come to your place and hang out and do our own thing? And they were actually granted, they're allowed to do this. And so the Mayflower, the very famous Mayflower, left, left from Plymouth, went across the Atlantic Ocean, spent 65 days at sea, and then finally landed on the new coast in the New World. They missed their destination by quite a bit. They landed in New England, not in Virginia, much different climate. They had 102 people that were aboard, which is kind of odd because teachers, for a long time have lied to you. Only a third of them were actually separatists or pilgrims. The other 2/3 were called strangers. Stranger danger, watch out. And they actually spent the entire first winter on the boat exploring the coast of Cape Cod and in that area. They basically stayed there until they ran out of beer. They had barrels and barrels and barrels of beer, and they drank lots. And plus, winter in Massachusetts isn't very pleasant. They surveyed the coast and landed at Plymouth Bay, not Plymouth Rock, even though there is a big rock in Plymouth and a tourist destination. They didn't actually come ashore to this big rock. It is ironic if you think about it. They left Plymouth, England, and landed in Plymouth, New England. Not a lot of free thinkers there, coming up with new names. England to New England and Plymouth to Plymouth. Maybe it was all that beer they drank. They became squatters outside of Virginia's jurisdiction, and they got exactly what they wanted, to be left alone. Before disembarking from the boat, though, they signed the Mayflower Compact, which is one of the seedlings or foundations of the United States of America. It's a really crude document. It formed a crude government to follow the will of the majority. Basically, what we decide as a group, we're going to follow, which is really significant because it's not God telling them what to do. It's not the king. It's not, the drunk guy who drank all the beer. It's we the people, which is the seedlings of democracy, or better definition of republic, because we have representatives in this country, started with these pilgrims. Like I said, they stayed on the boat the first winter. Only 44 of the 102 survived. Kind of grim circumstances. They went ashore and started planting crops. The Mayflower actually went back to 1621, and everyone else stayed. The Mayflower doesn't exist anymore. I think it was torn apart at some point, and the material is used for something else, and so there is no artifact of the Mayflower. They planted crops and harvested a bountiful amount that fall, and they had help from the natives, especially a young boy named Squanto, who kind of helped them on how to plant crops, including some fish for fertilizers, which I'm sure elementary schools are doing all around for little fun things. And this big harvest led to one of our most American holidays, Thanksgiving. Yay! A holiday where we stuff ourselves silly, we eat way too much food, and fall asleep watching football. Oh, it doesn't get any more American than that, except for maybe the 4th of July, when we, cook things over an open fire and then blow stuff up while watching baseball. I mean, man, America, come on. Awesome. It's said that they survived on beaver and the Bible that first year. Eating a lot of beaver, using the beaver pelts for clothing, and then reading scripture. Bon Jovi once sang "Living on a Prayer." You can modify it for the Pilgrims, living on beaver and the Bible. Sounds like a bad TV sitcom. I'm not sure. William Bradford led the group. He was elected governor of the Pilgrims, or the Plymouth colony, 30 times in a row. Term limits. Guess they didn't have them. Plymouth grew to about 7,000 people. I mean, you had the original 44, but more boatloads were coming year after year. But then they were dwarfed by their neighbor, the Massachusetts Bay Colony. And the two merged in 1691. So, let's talk about the other ones, the Puritans, who we get mixed up with the Pilgrims because they dress similar. They wear buckles on their hats, apparently. King Charles I, picture here, Charles I, dismissed Parliament in 1629, and he sanctioned some anti-Puritan persecutions. Charles I gets in some conflict with Parliament and loses his head over the whole idea. Literally loses his head. Bad joke. And he pushed the moderate Puritans to form the Massachusetts Bay Colony. So basically, get out. We don't want you here. You should go live in America where nobody else is there. If you study enough American history, you learn that we're kind of the island of misfit toys. People that weren't wanted and didn't fit in Europe, they came here. And so it worked out pretty well for us. They settled in Boston and brought their charter with them. 11 ships with almost 1,000 settlers started the colony in 1630. Much larger group, much more substantial than the Pilgrims. And so right away they dwarfed the Plymouth Bay, the Plymouth colony, almost immediately. And they continued this turmoil for decades. Was pushed many more to America during what's called the Great Migration. This is this big push of the Puritans coming to America. 70,000 refugees left England, 20,000 headed for Massachusetts. A lot of them went to Barbados, which I'm pretty sure I would have volunteered for that one. Like, I'll go to Barbados and start a colony. Yeah, we'll be on the beach praying. Just suntan. Yes, good. John Winthrop became the colony's first governor, and he was the governor for a long time of Massachusetts. And they had a sense of purpose to establish a city upon the hill, to quote the Bible, that they were going to be a shining light for the world to look at and be an example for everyone to follow. So here's a nice little chart that shows you the difference between Pilgrims and Puritans. Pilgrims, very few, came very early. They were poor, they were uneducated, they were separatists, they settled in Plymouth, and they had William Bradford, their leader. Puritans, there was a lot of them. They came later. They were upper middle class, so they had money. They were educated. They were loyal. Settled in Salem, where they start burning witches eventually, and Boston. And John Winthrop is the most famous. Here's the grave of John Winthrop, which is in Boston. If you do the Freedom Trail, which is a 2-mile brick trail through Boston, has a lot of historical sites and cemeteries. You can stumble upon that. Really fun if you're a history person and you like to travel. This is John Winthrop's quote: "For we must consider that we shall be as a city upon the hill. The eyes of all people are upon us, so," the English spelling, "so, that if we shall deal falsely with our God in this work we have undertaken, and so cause him to withdraw his present help from us, we shall be made a story and a byword throughout the world. We must never surrender," to quote Winston Churchill. We can't fail. So all property-owning male church members were allowed to vote for the General Assembly and the governor. Um, you had to be a male, had to be own property, but most importantly, you had to be a church member because there's lots of men who could not vote, lots of landowners who could not vote, but you had to be a church member. That was absolutely number one, which is only about 2/5 of the population, which isn't a great representation of the population, but it was much better than Europe. Believing that they had a covenant with God, they enforced church laws for all people in the colony, which is called a theocracy. Instead of separation of church and state, like you see in many of the southern colonies, you have the church is the state. And they're pretty hardcore with their religious laws. They shared a vision of the Protestant ethic that you should never be sitting idly and you shouldn't be having fun. Basically, you work all the time and because God despises you. It's pleasant. They're kind of emo kids. They wear a lot of black and talk about how much God hates them. They did enjoy eating a lot and drinking, but not too much. Singing, if it was religious, and monogamous relationships. They did have loving relationships. I mean, they did reproduce, so obviously they are, procreating a little bit. Many of life's pleasures were banned, though, and they're seen as kind of fun suckers and not a very happy, shiny, happy people, to quote REM. Connecticut was once known as the blue law state because they had so many old religious laws that were still in effect all the way in the 20th and 21st century. Colorado used to have a lot of these. Still today, Colorado, you can't buy a car or sell a car on Sunday. Until recently, the last few years, you couldn't buy booze on Sunday. The Puritans also had a deep fear of hell because that's what they heard about in church all the time. It wasn't shiny and pleasant and fun and uplifting church. Here's some examples of Puritan laws. Illegal activities. You could not beachcomb because that was idleness and laziness and fun. Don't do that. Hunting ducks. I'm not sure about other birds, but ducks, no. It's not quacktacular. Drama, theater, erotic poetry, religious music, and gambling were illegal. Any form of idleness or laziness, so don't sit around and just enjoy a sunset. Make sure you're knitting something or you have the Bible open. Swearing. Yeah. Sleeping during sermons, which could last for hours and hours. You could not fall asleep. You'd be punished for this. Held, put in shackles or in burnt. Skipping church. Better not sleep in on Sundays. Better not go out of town. That's a big no-no. Long hair. All you hippies get a haircut. Come on. You look terrible. And this is just easy maintenance, too. You just get out. You dry it off. It's perfect. Gluttony. I'm in trouble there. I like to eat, especially chips and salsa. Yummy. And all work on Sunday. Sunday was seen as a day of rest, but not too much rest. You couldn't do official work, but you better have a nice feast, and so you could work to prepare some food. And then kissing in public. No kissing. All you kids in the hallway, knock it off. Christmas was illegal in Boston and Massachusetts for 75 years. They banned Christmas, which Christmas back then wasn't our family, Christmas with Santa Claus and all that and the reindeer. It was more like Mardi Gras. It was a drunken revelry and a lot of naughty things going on. Bad things. Don't do them. Dating without parents' consent. They had to do the whole courtship process. Gossip. Hey, did you hear Joe missed church the other day? Yep, he was out beachcombing. That's illegal as well. They were also opposed to drinking heavily. Dancing. That's a big no-no. Card playing. Listening to certain types of music. They certainly wouldn't like hip-hop. And probably country music because it causes cancer. You need to know that. Reading novels or poetry. If you're going to read, it better be the Bible. Rolling dice. Going to horse races. Wearing jewelry or makeup. Or having thoughts related to sexual pleasure. Sex was for procreation. So let's just move on because that's weird. Here's some examples of punishments. Let's shackle them. Let's put them in whatever those things are called. My brain's slipping me. Apparently they have a dunking thing to dunk some people into the water. That's not like a ride at Waterworld. And some more of their old shackles. They also would mark people that committed adultery with a scarlet red A, the scarlet letter. Hey, that's a book. Thieves were branded with a T. They were whipped. I mean, these guys are kind of hardcore. So there is some trouble in the Bible Commonwealth. Some people began defying the Puritan orthodoxy, this right way of living. First, you have the Quakers, who are the opposite in terms of how people are viewed. Sorry. Whereas the Puritans believed man was wicked and weak and evil. The Quakers believed that everyone had an inner light of God and we were all special. You're special. We'll come back to the Quakers when we talk about Pennsylvania. Anne Hutchinson was a Quaker. She denied that the holy life was a sign of salvation. That's just putting on false pretenses, basically, to her. She believed in antinomianism. That's a really hard one to say. That the truly saved did not need to obey laws of any kind. That's a little different. She was banished after her trial in 1638. Her family was forced to leave to Rhode Island and then to New York, where she was pregnant at the time. She had 14 kids. And then sadly, all but one of her family was killed by Native Americans. And so she was a troublemaker, so they got rid of her. Which, remember, why the Puritans came here was for religious freedom. And they didn't grant it to anyone. Rhode Island was called a sewer at some point. Roger Williams fled to this area in 1636. He was persecuted by the Puritans because of his beliefs. He challenged the Puritan doctrines. And he first built the Baptist church in Providence. He wanted complete religious freedom or harsh religious laws. He didn't want any harsh religious laws. He wanted complete religious freedom. Sorry, a little bit typo there. Must be late. All men could vote regardless if they were church members or if they owned land. And Rhode Island became a place for misfits. It became a very fiercely independent place, rivaled only by North Carolina. They just did whatever they wanted. They didn't like to be told to do anything. They're very rebellious. And so it is a kind of a misfit area for being the smallest state in the Union. Rhode Island. Actually, our county, Garfield County here in Colorado, is bigger, twice the size of Rhode Island. The colony became strongly individualistic and independent, and it secured its own charter from Parliament in 1644. In the Connecticut River Valley was fertile and it attracted settlers, both Dutch and the English. Hartford was founded in 1635, and the founder that was really there was Thomas Hooker, who's actually one of my ancestors from my dad's side. And a group of Puritans moved west from Boston to Hartford in 1636. He's my 10th great-grandfather. That's actually a picture on there of my Ancestry.com page. I'll show you the family tree if you want to see it. We're awesome. That's all. They drafted the Fundamental Orders of Connecticut in 1639. This is significant because it's the first written constitution in America. It's the first idea that there's a contract between the people giving up their absolute freedom, and in return the government's going to protect them. That is like social contract theory. That's Hobbes and Locke. And it's the first real modern constitution. And New Haven became another flourishing settlement within Connecticut. It merged with Connecticut in 1662 because Charles II was angry with the settlement, and the new king's back because they chopped his dad's head off. And so they're like, sorry. And then they merged together. Maine was founded by Sir Ferdinando Jorges in 1623. It actually was eventually taken over Massachusetts in 1677. And then New Hampshire broke away from Massachusetts in 1679, which kind of gives you the New England colonies. Connecticut, Rhode Island, Massachusetts, and then Maine, and New Hampshire. We'll talk about Vermont here in a little bit. So here's the Massachusetts, the New England colonies that you can see. Plymouth was the first, followed by Boston. You have Salem. You have Portsmouth, New Hampshire, founded in there. You have Providence, Hartford, New Haven. New England, there it is. The Puritans, spreading out and through this great migration, conquering more land, clashed with the natives, where the Pilgrims worked with them because they were starving in the first winter. The Puritans clashed greatly with the Native Americans. In fact, some estimates are 3/4 of the natives died within a year of the Pilgrims arriving because of disease. The Wampanoag Indians cooperated with them. That's where you get Squanto. You have Chief Massasoit. Signed a treaty with the Plymouth Pilgrims and celebrated Thanksgiving, and it all started off great and was not a sign for things to come. In 1637, fighting broke out between the English settlers and the Pequot tribe over the Connecticut River. The Pequot War was brutally ended by the English with the slaughter of the Native Americans. This is a picture of it right here, and this is that continual theme of whenever the whites or the English or the Europeans spread westward or conquered new land, they clashed with the natives. The natives put up a fierce resistance. maybe enjoyed some success for a while, but eventually they were crushed. Natives' only hope was an alliance of all the tribes in the area. Massasoit's son, Metacom, or King Philip as he was known to the English, forged an alliance and coordinated attacks on villages all across New England. So much so that people had to, the refugees back, they fled back to Boston. And there was a lot of fear in the countryside of New England. And this war lasted until 1676. 52 villages were attacked by Metacom and his alliance during this time. Hundreds were killed on both sides. It's ugly. There's a lot of violence. Metacom was eventually caught, beheaded, drawn and quartered, and his head taken back to Plymouth as a deterrent against other Native Americans from doing this. This is all collectively known as King Philip's War. It slowed westward movement, but in the end, it actually eventually greatly hurt the New England natives and hastened their exit from their homeland. 4 colonies to protect themselves from these natives from King Philip's War formed the New England Confederacy or the New England Confederation in 1643. The English Civil War, which was going on between King Charles I and Parliament, left the colonies vulnerable and alone. They don't have royal protection anymore. The alliance was made for defense against natives, but also the French and the encroaching Dutch from New Netherland. Really, only 2 colonies, major colonies, were invited. It was Massachusetts and Connecticut. You have New Haven and Plymouth, but they're pretty small. They're not significant in this. But it's the seeds of cooperation that are planted. As they can get together when they have a common enemy. You know, it's the natives at this point, the French and the Dutch, but someday it's going to be the British. The American colonies grew increasingly autonomous. The king ignored them, and so they kind of ran their own business. And they ruled themselves. And so when people come in and try to tell them what to do, the Americans here have a hard time with it because they've been taking care of their own business for a long time. Massachusetts was actually punished at one point because it was so fiercely independent for not following royal orders and had their charter revoked. The Bay Colony was revoked in 1684, which kind of left them in a state of limbo for a while. And then in 1686, out of royal authority, the Dominion of New England was created. It was imposed by London. You have King Charles II in charge because of the Restoration. And it encompassed all of New England, New York, and New Jersey, which we'll talk about later. It also was created for defense purposes and to impose the Hated Navigation Acts. They're exclusive trading rules and laws that basically the royal colonies had to trade within the royal empire. They weren't allowed to trade wherever they could get a good deal. And this was to ensure that the English had trade and they kept their gold in their empire. And that's mercantilism and all that good stuff. And so it ensured basic essential goods and money stayed in the empire. Sir Edmund Andros was the leader of this Dominion of New England, and he was very, very hated and despised. He was stationed in Boston. He was a devout follower of the Church of England, which is a huge clash with the Puritans there. His soldiers that lived there and protected him did not respect Puritan laws, and we went through those in great detail there. And he also severely restricted the self-government of the people there and their rights, which really hurt them because they were living there for decades on their own. They had their way of life, and they get this new guy bossing them around, and then his bodyguards are doing whatever they want, and they're just being kind of jerky. They're being jerks to the Americans. So, inspired by the glorious Revolution of 1688, when England kicked out King James II, a Catholic, in favor of William and Mary, who came from Holland, it inspired them to do the same thing. This bloodless takeover inspired Bostonians to overthrow the Dominion of New England. Andros was captured. When he was captured, he was dressed as a woman, and he was shipped back to England. It's kind of humiliating. Same thing kind of happens to Jefferson Davis at the end of the Civil War. Massachusetts was still under royal rule. They received a royal charter in 1691. They had a royal governor, and their total autonomy was gone, but they were kind of left alone again by the English. Voting rights were extended at this point to non-church members. It became a more democratic society. There were also similar uprisings that occurred in New York and Maryland. But the navigation laws were ignored here. They're just salutatory neglect. 3,000-mile ocean made it easy to ignore some of these laws, and so Americans, once again, used to operating on their own and not following the rules. But as time progressed into the 18th century or the 1700s, more and more royal officials were coming to America every year, which was making America mad. So hope you enjoyed this. Have any questions, put them in the comments, and we'll see you for the next one.